Batu, Barada, Nikto.
You must remember those words.
Gordon's alive.
You know what the Turing test is?
I know Kung Fu.
Dead or alive, you are coming with me.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Stories Out of Time and Space. I'm your regular host, Scott Weatherly, and as always, I'm joined by Julian Darius. Julian, how are you doing?
I am fine and happy and ready to work.
Work is good. We're jumping forward. We're going from the first Doctor. We've done the Peter Cushing Doctor. We're now into officially the second Doctor, Patrick Troughton. The new Doctor. We're going to go into the story. We're going to be doing the Macra Terror, which has different companions, different Doctor, completely different setup. And so, yeah, we're going to be getting into this one. This is also the thing to highlight and note about this one is this is a lost series. This was a 4-parter, and it was a lost series. So this was broadcast in 1967, and it was obviously lost in the archives and destroyed. And there's only little bits and pieces left. And so this was reanimated, actually just animated, I should say, using an audio track that they had. And I believe it was animated in like 2012 or something like that, 2014, I think, something like that. Or maybe more recent than that, actually. But yes, we are going to be discussing... 2019, this one. Wow. We are going to be discussing the animated story. So a couple of quick notes. As I said, the Doctor is Patrick Troughton. He is joined by Jamie, played by Fraser Hines, Polly by Annette Wills, and Ben, Michael Craze. And the story is quite simple. The TARDIS lands on a planet that it's referred to as a holiday camp, but I can't see it really being a holiday camp. They refer to it as a colony. They land in a colony on a planet where everyone seems incredibly happy and incredibly sort of happy to be doing their work. The Doctors and find that they mine a gas on this planet, and the more they dig, the more they stay. They find that there's actually some discontent and paranoia, especially from their security officer, Ola. When they are held up for the evening, they find that they have subliminal messaging sent to them, which actually sort of gets to Ben, and he turns on them and turns traitor. But eventually they find that the planet has a secret. The mines are there to mine gas for the Macra, a crab-like species that are actually in control of the colony. And of course, the Doctor solves all the problems and then leaves. So,
crab people.
Yeah,
crab people.
I get the feeling that I'm glad this one was animated. Knowing what the special effects budgets would have been. Just to sort of back this up, I went and watched an episode of a non-lost Patrick Troughton episode. I didn't get to watch all of the whole series. I watched an episode though. I forget which one it was, but just to see him as the Doctor, just because obviously this is animated. So I went and watched a couple. Well, I actually watched 2 in the end, but and that gave me a bit of a grounding for this to see how good the animation was. But first and foremost, Julian, what were your thoughts on the Macra Terror and the animation and stuff?
Well, I quite enjoyed this. I enjoyed this more than the Aztecs. And I haven't seen a lot of Troughton as the Doctor. You know, more episodes of his are missing than Hartnell. And it's been... But I've been following the release of these animated versions. Back when I was sort of going through and watching old Doctor Who, there weren't these animations, and they had these sort of reconstructions where they had stills, and then they put, sort of descriptions at the bottom of the screen, like, the Doctor runs into the other room, and they play the audio track. And then there's still ones that have not been animated, but then as these animated ones are rolled out, they're played on AMC over here, and they kind of get a little bit of fanfare. So I've watched several of those. But I found this quite enjoyable, and I do think that it is more enjoyable in the animation. There's something just sort of charming about it.
I agree. I mean, I was a little worried going in that how stilted will the animation be, because I know sort of like this was done on a relatively limited budget. Like, this isn't Pixar. That's it's not Pixar. This is a 2D animation. However, it still works. There are moments when it looks a little stilted, and you get like the repetition of movement and stuff. But like, it's good. It's actually really good. I think the expressions are good, but also I think like the coloring in this, of the backgrounds and some of the cutaway scenes, but also like when they have the gas and the Macra sneaking out the shadows and stuff, like, it's really well done. Like, I really enjoyed some of those scenes.
Yeah, the Macra look good, and it's one of those things where I found myself actually looking at that reconstructed one with the stills and sort of comparing it to the animation, because I had always thought that the animation very closely followed sort of shot for shot what the composition of those shots was in the original. That doesn't seem to be the case. It probably is the case in a lot of shots, especially close-ups and things like that. But there are stills of like the marionettes, which are quite enjoyable. There's this for listeners, there's a sort of team of marionettes that sing, and, sort of like sing a happy song about work, and to kind of keep everyone motivated, because I guess the hypnotic suggestion isn't enough. And so you see them very early on, and they come back at the end. But the shots of the marionettes in the stills are quite different. Now, those might be publicity stills or whatever was on hand, as opposed to a still from the lost episode. But it does seem like some liberties have been taken. And you do see, like, there was a shot of the skyscraper in the background where you see figures in the windows. And I'm quite sure the original didn't have those figures. Yeah. And that's like, we're going to spruce this up a little because we could just put that in there in animation.
It definitely feels a little bit like when they redid. Think of it like the Star Wars special editions. Like, they've been able to go in and do some sort of like cleanup. And I think some of the transitional shots are fantastic. Like you said, there's the skyscraper, or like there's like wide shots of the colony with the lighting and sort of like mist and stuff, and the colors are fantastic. Like, sort of like I say, the blues and the sort of greens that are used in this in particular work really well. And you do get and it's in color as well, and you do get that feeling of like, the BBC never had the budget to do this. So I'm pretty sure they'd have been like scene, none of these transitional shots. I think there's some liberties been taken. However, like you say, because it's still an audio track, they're still just using the audio, and that works. They've sunk that up with the animation, or the animation has sunk up to the audio track incredibly well, which I thought was quite impressive. There never seemed to be an area where it was off. Do you know what I mean? It never felt like the animation was missing a beat or anything. It's well done to them for that, because that's quite impressive.
Yeah, and I agree, and I think it's wonderful that they're doing this, and also I'm with you about the Macra, the crabs, that there is a fight with the crabs in the mines where you can tell that they're sort of imitating the way it was originally done, as a claw kind of comes on screen and grabs the character, and that character sort of wrestles with it quite too long, and it does make me think, right, seeing a puppet of a crab hand come on screen would have been quite painful.
Yeah, this is one of those things, isn't it? Like you said, we didn't get this with the Aztecs because it was history based. So these are really the first. Well, we've met the Daleks, but again, the Daleks are they're robotic in that sort of like they're inorganic. So this is the first sort of like organic alien that we've come across. In fact, we haven't, because we've seen the animation. So I'm curious to see what we do. And like I said, this is where the budget obviously starts to sort of have that factor. But luckily, I think the charm of it is where it sort of like holds off, because you're able to accept some of this where you're like, yeah, it looks a bit rinky dink, but I'm invested and I'm happy with it, so I'm going with that. And so I haven't seen it. I've seen some of the stills, as you say, but just listening to the audio, I can tell that this feels very different to the Hartnell years.
Mm-hmm.
Like the show has changed by this point. And already I feel this is closer to the Who that I know than what I saw with the Aztecs.
Yeah, let's go into that, because I mean, it seems to me the most obvious way that that's the case is that the Doctor is less curmudgeon-y and he's more the driving force of the plot.
Yeah.
In the Aztecs, you can virtually remove the Doctor and you just need somebody else to supply that potion or whatever, and the Doctor is unnecessary. Here, the companions really are assistants to the Doctor now.
Yes. Yeah, and that's true. And that's is I see watching this couple of other episodes to get a feel for Troughton. I kind of like him. Like he has, I've heard it joked he has like an impish sense of humor. Like he's a little bit sort of like irreverent with things. Like he doesn't really care. He's happy to be involved. And there's a great scene towards the end of this where Ola is trying to take over from the pilot who runs the colony. And when the Doctor comes in, he just sort of says, "Oh, well, it's all irrelevant now." Sort of like, pilot apologise to Ola. Ola apologise to pilot. Right, we're all happy. Move on. And that very much felt almost like Matt Smith, like modern Doctor Who. That sort of like your sort of like internal politics are irrelevant to me, and I'm just gonna look. There's more important things. So let's just deal with it, but deal with it in an almost sort of like charmingly silly way. And even down to his costuming, like it's almost like a stripped back version, because obviously the Hartnell Doctor was sort of like almost like a 3-piece suit. He had the spat sort of shoes and the canes and all this other stuff, the overcoat and the hat. It was he was very costumed. But with Troughton, you're down to sort of like ruffled shirt and trousers and jacket with a bow tie. Like they've really sort of like brought him back, but it's still very distinctive. Yet it feels a bit more like they've gone for a character where he's like, well, my appearance doesn't really matter. It's more about the journey. It's more about what we're doing than how I look. And again, that sort of feels a bit more like the Doctor that I will get to know.
Yeah, I think you're right about all of that. And I've heard people talk about Troughton as sort of the first comedic Doctor, that he sort of took the Doctor character in this, as you say, irreverent sort of direction. And I think to me, it doesn't come off that way. I mean, to me, compared to sort of, David Tennant or Matt Smith, he's very staid. But certainly it's a radical departure from Hartnell in the direction of, as you say, being less costumed, more sort of irreverent, and certainly the center of the action. I mean, he is a guy with agency, and this does feel more like a traditional Doctor Who story.
Yeah, and again, he has a different relationship to the companions. Like you said, in the past, like in the Aztecs, the companions were, like you said, taking the lead. That was the setup of the show almost. Like he was the vehicle, but they were the sort of the point of view characters, which has always been the case. But with Polly, Ben, and Jamie, they do feel like they are being taken on a journey rather than sort of like we're here and now we're going to learn about this. It's more like from the offset. Like I like the fact they're very different. Like Jamie is a bit more sort of like not paranoid, but he's very wary. Like the first thing he does when he gets off the TARDIS and they land, is like he grabs a stick and he's like, "No, I'm going to protect myself. Like I've seen enough that I know I'm going to need a stick." And the others are like, "Oh, chill out." And then straight away someone runs into him. So he's sort of like he's proven right. So these feel less. They feel younger for a start. And it feels less like like a vehicle for education, which I think the sort of the companions did in the Hartnell stories.
Yeah. No, I think that's true. I mean, I sort of feel that these three companions are sort of boring to me. They all sort of, maybe this is later sort of woke perspective, but they're all very much sort of like your bland, relatively young white people. They don't really have a lot of personality to me. Obviously, they are differentiated, right? Ben is only too happy to, respond to this brave new world. And, Polly is the girl, and Jamie is the Scot,
Who wears a kilt.
He wears a kilt.
And I had to check this because I was like, is that a little, like you said, like a flourish they've done for the animation? Oh, no, that was how they defined him. He wore a kilt. Like every Scotsman wears a kilt all the time.
Well, he's the only one who's not from the present day.
Yes.
So the other two were from the 60s, pulled out of time. And Jamie was from like 18th century Scotland or something. But he seems totally adapted to, space travel at this point.
Right. I followed on from this because I wasn't sure about that and I had to check. And you're right. So he comes from, and again, not been done that I'm really aware of, not done against. I'm not aware of any of the companion. But beyond that, they all become contemporaries of the show, if you know what I mean. Like, they're from the era the show's in. So I think it's really cool to have that, and it makes sense. Why wouldn't you have a companion from a different timescale? There is one in the next sort of thing. It's called the faceless ones, and there was I had a look at, and there was, but they land on an airstrip, like I think whatever it is, Gatwick Airport, where they land on a base on a runway, and they come out, and the doctor's like, "Oh, scatter!" Jamie's first response is like, "Ah, look at these metal flying tubes." And you're like, "You've been to space." You've just seen like giant crab monsters taking over a colony, and you're shocked by planes. Like,
yeah,
you're right. Like his acclimatization.
It's like the writers realize, like, remember he's Scottish and he's from the past.
Yeah, his acclimatization seems to go up and down a little bit, which is fine because I actually kind of like Jamie in this. He's the most interesting of the companions.
He does seem the most active. I mean, he's the one who goes into the tunnels, and he's the most at risk.
Yeah, he seems to be, like you say, the most active, because I think the thing you say about Ben being the most open to the experience is actually his downfall, and I kind of like that as an interesting concept of like he's the one, because he's so open to it, like he's also open to the voices that take control. Whilst Jamie's paranoia is the one that sort of like allows him to fight them a bit. And Polly, just being a girl, is barely mentioned. So,
yeah, I like Polly. I wanted to see more of Polly. Yeah, I mean, maybe there's a commentary there that Ben is from Britain in the 1960s and he's a white man, and so he's like, right, I'll go along with this white guy control system.
Yeah.
Makes perfect sense.
This seems incredibly normal. I'm happy with everything that's going on here. But like they say, Ben and Polly are played as that sort of 60s, sort of like, right on. But they're not quite hippie. They're still relatively sort of square or straight. But they're very 60s. But again, it plays as slightly boring, as you say. But I do think there is a correlation between Ben's openness and the fact he is the one that is hypnotized easiest by the messaging in the sleep chambers.
Yeah, and quite effectively. I mean, he right away. I mean, he's just like, but we have to work. They've been so kind to us. He's quite effectively taken in.
Yeah. Straight away, he's just like, well, the colony comes first, and it was like,
yeah, well, you're not a part of this colony. We're visitors, right? You know, we've got a TARDIS, right?
Yeah. So but I do like that. There needs to be there was the companion in peril kind of moment, and so I like the fact that it isn't just They stay together. They're always on the side of right and stuff. This is the first time, at least I'm seeing, where like a companion has been like, oh no, they're in danger, or they're at least being succumbing to something from one of these threats. And I think that again will come up again, where there'll be companions that are like hypnotized or replaced or whatever, and put the Doctor at threat.
Well, if the companions are not enthralling to me, and Troughton is not enthralling to me as Doctor. I mean, I understand his place in history, but what I find most interesting and what really makes this episode work to me is the plot. That it actually is a solid plot. Is it unique? No. Is it derivative? Absolutely. But it is quite interesting, and it works for the most part. It has a few, twists, and I quite like the plot. I mean, you could basically adapt this as a present-day Doctor episode, and it would work fine. You could adapt this as a Star Trek episode, and it would work fine.
Yes.
It's just a solid plot.
I almost think they have adapted it as a modern. I'm pretty sure if you were to look through some of the present-day Who episodes, you would find a correlation to this episode of turns up on Colony, finds Colony has been corrupted by external force, saves the day. Like it's very much a standard Who plot. So I don't know. I think it's good though. I agree. It's a solid plot, and I'm glad it works over the 4 parts.
Yeah, and I sort of think that it owes a lot to Brave New World. It owes a lot to sort of that Brave New World 1984, that sort of fascistic, Fahrenheit 451. Right down to the costumes of the stormtroopers, look very much Fahrenheit 451 to me. And Control seems to come out of Brave New World along with this hypnosis and stuff like that. So that's interesting. It doesn't go super deep in there, but it sort of adapts that and uses that for a colony. And I think it's quite clever to, in a sense, I spent a lot of the episodes, of the 4 episodes, thinking, I don't really need the crab monsters. I don't even need the Macra. What's going on with this fascistic thing is story by itself. But at the end, I thought, well, it is a clever turn of that fascistic story to say, right, that's easy for the enemy to take control over the system of total authoritarianism. It just needs a crab person to, be in charge of it. So I really did like that.
Yeah, I like it. Again, like the setup of the colony, as you say, it's a bit derivative, but again, this is still 67, so it's not, it's not. I suppose in that, in 1967, it'd still be relatively fresh to people. Sort of like, we haven't had the repetition of it. But again, I like this idea of this thing being like an authority. But it more than me liking it, it makes sense. Like, if you're going to set up a colony in space, and you often see this, like, you need a hierarchy. Like, okay, we need a structure and a hierarchy because we're not setting up in Devon. Like, this is on a different planet. This has got different atmosphere. There is a harsh reality to this. We need a control system in order to survive. And it feels like this colony's gone through that and then come out the other side of that, but then maintained this structure and this hierarchy and this control, and it's sort of become almost like a safety mechanism, and then it's been corrupted and taken over. Because there is one thing I was interested in, like the control itself. Right, and I want to see what your thoughts were on this. Is it the end of the 2nd episode, possibly? I think it must be the end of the 2nd episode. They breach or they break part of the control sort of thing, and it pulls up this image of this old man. It says, "Well, show me the controller. Show me the controller." And so, because you've had this big blue face watching down on them as sort of like the controller.
That's a still.
Yeah, which
the
is
key
it's
thing,
just
right.
it's just a big still of a face, and then the voice comes through, and they say, "Well, show me the controller," and basically you get this sort of like withdrawn, withered, elderly man looking terrified, and then they're like, "Well, that's not the controller. Look at he's." I think one of them even says that doesn't look like a man that's in control or something like that.
Mm.
And then you see the shadows of the claws across him, and he sort of like he looks terrified, and that's the end of the episode.
Mhm.
And then the crap, like in the next episode, it's clear the Macra have killed him, and everyone still just carries on. But then I was like, okay, well, how does this work? Because after that, the Macra are able to control all the machines and all this other stuff and do what they do. What function did this old man serve?
I was confused by that too.
Yeah,
And given that the old man is, as far as we know, only seen that one time, clearly
Yeah.
it's not a normal thing to demand to see him.
Mm.
Why even have him at all? Except, I guess, to confuse people that yes, there really is a human in charge. Except you see the claws, so it's pretty clear. They're not.
The screen doesn't hide anything. It's not like it goes,
Yeah.
oh well, he's perfectly fine. Like a hostage video. Like, they're treating me very well, and the food is good. Like,
Well, I get to eat crab all day.
yeah.
Yeah, presumably not. But yeah, I mean, do you think that he sort of he is the still image as a younger man, and that he was sort of taken over by the Macra, and that they then used the pre-existing system of control and just sort of dominated the controller?
Yeah, I think in this thing, 'cause you don't get an origin story, like you don't get a causal reason for why this happened. But in my head, I came up with this thing of exactly that. Like that image you see on the screen is a younger version of him. And at some point, 'cause you have a pilot, and I thought the name pilot was interesting, as this guy who's sort of in control, the front man of the thing. It's like, okay, has that come from when they actually travelled here? That the pilot of the ship was always considered the man in control, and they've just maintained that title. I was like, okay, that's quite a cool little a titling that's come from legacy. Like it felt like it had a reason. But then you have this controller. Yeah, like, was he like the brains behind this thing that was like, yeah, this is what we're going to do and this is how it's going to work? But then I was like, okay, well, when did the mining come into it?
Yeah.
Because I'm like, okay, because they're mining a gas, aren't they? Then they've got these tunnels in place to direct it. So I'm like, okay, so this, and they keep getting told that that's what the colony needs to survive. So like I said, what do they think they're doing with this gas then?
Yes, I was confused by that too. Yeah, I don't know. It's not very clear. What do they think that? I mean, do they think this is fuel that's powering their machines? Nobody ever says something. But I do like the idea that this system of servitude, of almost slavery, is able to be exploited by the Macra. That it's like, right, they do as they're told. They're used to mining. Let's just have them mine the gas we need, and we'll just hole up in the control room.
Yeah, and I kind of like, it gets, the end is quite interesting. That sort of the way they've taken over and they sort of live in these tunnels and this control room, and the fact there's the mine, and that was the sort of like the final key to all this to me. Because at one point I was watching this and I was like, well, if they're doing like fracking and it's all done with machines, so this isn't the worst scenario. Like the end of this could be like a reconciliation of like, well, actually, look, because they all look pretty happy and healthy and they're fed and they're doing all right. So why is this a problem? And then you learn that there are the mines for those that are troublemakers or whatever. They are sent down the mines, and it's what's the character's name? The guy with the beard and the bowl cut. One of the first ones you see.
Yeah.
I want to say Malcolm, but I don't think it is. Medoc, thank you. He gets sent down there, and that's obviously, you see him down the mines later on, and he actually says, like, because they say, well, the mines aren't very populated. So yeah, because people don't live very long down here.
Yeah.
So you realise that there is a sort of a punishment element to this. There is a sort of a sacrifice that's being made. So you go, oh, okay, well, that's a bit of a problem. And Ola the security chief is more than happy to
send people to their
deaths.
People.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, so the problem
but dude, get a spacesuit.
Yeah.
Right? Like, they have masks, but you see them. But right, I mean, this could be easily solved by maybe give them some protection when you send them into the mines.
This was when I was when it gets to the end of the series, I had some real problems with the resolution of this show.
Because it's genocide?
Yes, literally, but because this when you find the Macra, like the Macra are trying to survive, and you go first thing like, are they indigenous? Like, did the colony do something that's actually affected them, and they've had to adapt? And they're like, right, fine, we'll get them working for us. I don't get enough of the relationship. Like the Doctor refers to them as parasitic, and so the show simply presents them as an enemy. They are the other. They are the alien. Therefore, they are the ones to be destroyed. But I'm going like, were they here first? Like, is this their planet?
It's pretty clear to me that I don't believe that they brought along like Red Dwarf, like it was somebody's pet crab that got mutated, and became the Macra. Yes, no, I mean this bothers me too. That the Macra were presumably indigenous to this planet. They're obviously intelligent, but when the Doctor sees them in the control room, there's all this talk about how they're a virus and they're bacteria, which is really racist, trope language, and the Doctor says, and everybody who's with him agrees, they must be destroyed. Well, why?
I was like, I don't see how there's not a reconciliation. Like, okay, there has been people died down in the mines. That though is not the Macra's fault. It's poor. That's actually the colonists' fault because they're like, well, we gave them poor. We use it as a punishment. Oh, well, that's not the Macra's fault. That's actually you're the one that's in charge of health and safety, not them. That's that was more of the human factor. And so by the end of this, I was wholly expecting there, and maybe this is my mindset for like modern Who. Mm-hmm. I was fully expecting there to be some reconciliation where the Doctor's like, well, you can live alongside together in harmony, and it gives you a purpose, and it can be the gas can actually be used for this as well, and all this other stuff. Like I was expecting there to be this sort of like reconciliation. Nope, just blow them up, move on.
Yes, yeah, I feel the same way, and it does seem genocidal, because there's also it's not clear if there are other Macra living deeper inside the planet. Why do they need? If they are indigenous to the planet, why do they need this gas? If they're not, why would they need the gas also? I mean, none of that setup really makes sense. And it's not clear if there are other Macra on the planet. If there were, I'm quite confident the Doctor and others would want to go out and murder them all. I mean, It seems to me they're absolutely genocidal. And clearly, this is an intelligent, advanced species. I mean, I did find myself sympathizing with the Macra.
No, more than anything, not they're intelligent, and they can communicate. So that's what was it's and they are scared. At the end of that was the other problem I sort of had is when the Doctor does his thing and he's going to turn on the inflow and the outflow for the pipes, it's going to cause an explosion. Like they are scared. And they're like, don't do that, please, no, stop him. And I'm like, hang on. Like, it made me feel really uncomfortable. That, like, the end of this series ends, like you said, in genocide.
And nobody mentions it. No. Everybody's fine with that.
Well, they have a big party at the end.
And they want to have a holiday for the Doctor. They want to remember him. It's like their liberator.
That's they want to make him the new pilot. Like he wants to be celebrated. The other problem I had, I think this sort of becomes part of this sort of like, let's say, symbiotic relationship. I don't know how long this has been going on for. I don't know how many years this mining has been happening. But they have spent this entire time and they're like, work is good. It is our purpose. We do this. You have literally just taken away the purpose of this colony. Yeah. Whilst everyone's celebrating, yay! They didn't all know they were under pressure anyway. Like, granted, there was a subliminal stuff. Take away all that. That's fine. I understand. Definitely take away the subliminal control. What do they do tomorrow? Do they get up and they're all like, well, we were being fed before from control, but that's no longer happening. So we better sort of learn to farm on this this barren planet pretty quick.
Yeah, it's not clear where they get that food from, or how this economy works. But yeah, I mean, you're quite right. I hadn't thought of that. I mean, it's also worth pointing out that they have lived for years equating work with happiness. Well, if you remove that work, you remove their entire social system. What replaces it? We're really sad. It's not as if the gas wears off and you say, right, everything that I've ever said to anyone else for 30 years was a lie. So let's just listen to some grunge music and, we don't have to do anything anymore.
I want this to go further. Like, I want this to be like the Doctor returns to check in on them a year later, and it's absolutely like Mad Max. They've all just gone feral and they're all fighting in the corridors. Like,
yeah, it's like Wrath of Khan. Like,
yes.
Look what you've done.
Yeah, yes,
right.
Yeah, the Wrath of Macra.
Yeah.
It does feel like that. Like, you've just taken away everything you've killed the Macra and ruined this colony's purpose. Like, you've not replaced it with anything.
Well, everyone's going to be able to dance and sing now. I mean, everyone will be a marionette.
Yeah. But I did feel watching this. I felt uncomfortable at the end of this series, where I was a little bit like, that wasn't what I was expecting.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I sort of expect it, from shows of this era. But yeah, I mean, I was also uncomfortable, especially once I clued into, well, when they talk about they're a virus. Yeah. That's where I start getting uncomfortable. I'm like, hold on, I want to talk to those Macra. Like, I want to, have a conversation with them.
I actually think, and you make a good point actually there about shows of this era and how you would expect it. I think the animation had a bit of an effect on me because I was watching this and going like, "Oh, cool, animated Doctor Who," and because it was so good, and I was enjoying it, and the visuals are so good. There were times I was forgetting, like, oh yeah, this is based on a 1967 show, or this is a 1967 show, and the audio is such, and there are moments when it's a little bit scratchy and almost inaudible. But I think the animation set me up to think, oh no, this is a much more modern story, and it's not.
Yeah, I mean, I guess having seen other animated reconstructions of Doctor Who, I mean, some of which are quite painful and have that same sort of pacing problem that I feel with the Aztecs, where it's like, oh my god, and there are shots in like that here where I think, really, it takes 30 seconds to walk across this scene, like, why are you, do you not value my time at all?
There was at least two where I swear they slowed down the animation, and I was like, this is bizarre, like how slow these people are moving.
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't forget that it's an old episode, right? But what I do find myself I don't have quite that reaction, but I do have a voice in my head that says, why, like, it's the same sort of thing that I feel about a lot of old Doctor Who, where I think this needs an edit. And I think not just for speed, not just for, the stuff that's padding. I mean, I think this would be a fantastic, hour-long episode. Just rip-roaring, great hour-long Doctor Who episode. But, but also an edit for sort of some of the themes that we're talking about. Of sort of like, yeah, maybe don't talk about the Macra the way Triumph of the Will talks about the Jews, like, just maybe not word for word. Okay, Doctor?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. It's interesting because it shows they have, their thoughts on what the Doctor is still evolving a little bit. Because like you say, Troughton is different to Hartnell, but there's still that thing of like, well, they're the enemy, so we'll kill them, which sort of starts to go, I think, sort of, even within classic Who, I think, as you get into some of the later ones. But yeah, there is definitely sort of a binary thing of like, colonists good, Macra bad. Like there is no question of that.
Yeah, and I think it's key that they are so alien in appearance, right?
Yes.
I mean, it is this sense of a classic other. Like, no matter how I mean, they're clearly intelligent. They're running a colony.
Yeah.
They're smart enough to take it over. They're not malicious. I mean, you do see them fighting humans, but they're not like torturing humans for fun. They want their gas to survive, and it does seem as if like, yeah, well, they're crab people. There's no redemption for crab people. They're
Yeah.
crabs. So I mean, the sense of morality is a sort of very simplistic one of, as you say, sort of our side, their side, us versus them. Also, they look different, so they're inhuman, which is problematic in all kinds of ways. And also a sort of simplistic morality that values freedom, even though freedom to what? What's your colony going to be doing? How terrible was it before? Now I say all of this, and you're saying like you expect a sort of like, or you want a sort of more modern Doctor Who morality. I mean, which you certainly saw, Star Trek in this time and stuff
Yeah.
like that. But the modern Doctor who would be troubled by these things. Having said that, not the most recent episode, but the most recent season of Doctor Who with Jodie Whittaker ends with the Doctor committing a double genocide that is never commented upon.
Yes.
So while everything you're saying is true, and we come from a later era that we want, the Doctor to be a good guy or girl, it's not as if that's. I mean, it's ironic to me that a very recent episode just had a genocide
Yes.
we were completely fine with, or the show was.
I don't think I was fine with it, but yes, I agree. Yeah, it is interesting, like you say. It definitely feels like it's here, that idea of. I think the thing is, it taps into fears, doesn't it, as well? That's the other thing of like, what is this show tapping into? I was just checking this thing about subliminal control. I'm sure it's been around for a while because she's had things like I don't know when the Manchurian Candidate was made and all those other things, but like subliminal advertising had become sort of like a thing from. I saw the first one was 1957, and so it had become sort of more of a thing since then. And so this idea of subliminal control, clearly in the zeitgeist, people clearly understood the potential for it. And so the fact that the Macra are manipulating using subliminal control, again, stands them up as the baddie, if you will, in this situation. But again, like if you twist that and go, well, they just adapted to find a way to use an invading force to ensure their survival, then again, I'm still a bit like, yeah, I'm not wholly against what they're actually, yes, they probably could have been a better way. They can communicate, so they should have talked it out, but they're still trying to survive. We invaded their, I don't
Habitat, presumably.
Yeah. But then again, we were talking just before this about this idea of Britain and its place in the world. Don't forget, like this British mentality of imperialism was still pretty strong in the 60s. Of like so.
Well, I mean, the Macra are the Aborigines,
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah, we turned up and took over, and that's a good thing.
Right. Well, I wanted to say that it's interesting to me that one of the greatest complaints that I have about classic Who and even of modern Who is that it rarely really wants to interrogate its subjects, right? It uses themes and especially the original series, not really in a sort of 2000 AD way of sort of stealing from the headlines or from what's popular, but it will take ideas like we've talked previously about the later serial with that sort of steals from High Rise. This obviously is taking from Brave New World and stuff like that, but it doesn't want to really explore what it is about the human condition that tends toward fascism. or that is happy with this kind of situation, wants a control, right? It's just a backdrop for an adventure. And in fact, having, while I like the story, having the Macra be responsible is not just racist because it presumes, they're a virus, right? It's pretty clear, but also racist in that, going back to that imperial history, right? The Aborigines, give them a chance and they'll take over and they'll enslave us.
Yeah.
Right. That's not really what's happening on the ground, but there's a way in which you need to build up the other into a menace, even though, yeah, the Macra are, for all intents and purposes, the indigenous oppressed population here. You've just made them, you've given them the position of power for the plot purposes in order to justify a genocide. But, in reality, you're the ones with the technology and all the power.
Yeah, one person's virus is another person's freedom fighter. It's just like from the Macro point of view, they were like, haha, we've adapted to this new invading force. Like again, this is the problem, like you said, we said this about the Aztecs. When you go back, you have to accept things in the terms of the time that it was invested. And this is what I do. I look at this more like a pulp adventure, as you say. Like this is it works as a pulpy adventure. Like it works at a pretty good pace overall. There's some good twists. There's some good action. The Doctors are much more of an engaging force. There's some good humor. When Medoc's trying to escape and the Doctor sort of just pops up and starts talking to him about stuff, like it's all that works incredibly well. And I actually overall I enjoy this as a pulpy adventure. But like you say, it's not. It sort of presents a little bit of a theme and stuff, but it's clearly not. Yeah, it's not there to be interrogated in that way, or even going to attempt to give you anything other than a pulpy adventure.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right, and I think that's very well put. And I think that it seems to me that all of that Brave New World 1984 stuff that I like so much in this, that's a huge part of what I like about this serial, is really there to just make this not another boring generic colony.
Yes.
And of course it's relevant to the plot because that's used by the Macra to, control the colony and whatnot. But really it's window dressing.
Yes.
It's there to, distinguish this. Well, what are we going to, right. The Doctor encounters an Earth colony that is surprisingly like Brave New World. And,
It's the thing is, this idea of colonies as well, I want to sort of, because colonies have become like a sci-fi staple. And in season 4, we're going to talk about something very similar to this, in the sense of in Outland, the Sean Connery film, which I'm very much looking forward to talking about. But the thing is, watching this, I did think about colonies. I mean, there's the control element. They're wearing the lovely pressed and beautifully immaculate uniforms and costumes and stuff like that.
I do like the costumes.
I do as well. Like, I went back and checked some of the slides and those images, and they some of them are quite good. But the designs are very good. I do like them. But one of the things I'm interested in is this idea of colonies, this future thing we have of colonies. And watching this did make me think of 3 things in particular that sort of popped out as I was watching this. And it was so Outland came to mind because that's a mining colony. And so I was like, okay, well, when you watch Outland, when we get to it, and we'll talk about it, but then it's a very industrial, a very sort of like, it's there to mine. And so it's a very sort of like, cobbled together. It's very dirty. It's all this other stuff. It's like a roughneck kind of place because these are hardy people working in a sort of a tough environment. And so you go, okay, well, that's my expectation. These are colonizers. And then I thought of like Aliens. Again, like the TARDIS appeared on LV-426. Sort of like with the xenomorph being way more of a threat than the Macra. And again, that's sort of that alien species. But then the other one that may come to mind actually watching this was Starship Troopers.
Yeah, so with the bugs.
With the bugs, yeah. And especially being intelligent and stuff. And so again, I'm watching this. I was like, we've obviously covered this, and the films have covered this time and time again, and how that colony is, depicted slightly varies. But it's not very often that it's depicted to such an extent that in the credits or in some blurbs they'll describe it as a holiday camp. This is not a new colony, but the whole setup was really interesting to me. That like how organized and bureaucratic it all felt compared to these later versions of colonies that we are shown. And is that still like a British thing? Is that like a British 60s thing of how bureaucratic and organized this thing is compared to like Aliens and Outland and say Starship Troopers?
Here in Tommy's holiday camp.
Yeah.
The camp with a difference.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I think you're right. That is fascinating. I mean, I like the sort of 60s colonies that you see on Star Trek, and with the costumes, and and it's all very clean, it's all very like you say, sort of bureaucratic and organized, but I mean, as much as I enjoy this serial, I think we're sort of pointing out how, I mean, this may be one of the most racist, vile stories in Doctor Who. I mean, really, this is, you talked about this sort of British efficiency, British bureaucracy. I mean, right, this is sort of a metaphor for, I mean, if we run this as like the Aborigines, right? We've got these good British colonizers who are very bureaucratic, very efficient, willing to, willing to send people into the mines, but, but have a system of law and order and justice and all of these things, may be prone to fascist control, but that fascism is never really questioned or interrogated much here. I mean, you do see Medoc sort of running from it, but the central threat, instead of interrogating, wait a minute, we're sort of fascist colonizing bastards, aren't we? Instead it's like, oh no, the problem are those Aborigines who need to be exterminated, and then we'll be free.
Well, is it? would you be expecting like that moment, like in The Walking Dead, where Rick Grimes like to the people surviving, like no, we are the Walking Dead? Would it be sort of like the pilot turning around to his colonizer going like, no, we are the virus?
Yeah, sure. I mean, and that would happen today. I mean,
yeah.
As we were talking about these changing attitudes, I do think that, I mean, you see it even, we've seen it in talking about Doctor Who, we've seen it in talking about the Twilight Zone on the Patreon, is, so often I think it is our instinct today to identify with the other. And if we have an android, that android is going to be someone we sympathize with, even if they're not the main character. The main character might still be a white bloke, but the android is going to be characterized and sympathized with. That was not true in the 60s, and clearly is not true here. And I just think that's a change of time. But let it never be said that is infusing those more recent stories with politics, because just as clearly this story has politics. I mean, saying these are an inhuman virus that just needs to be exterminated without any concern is absolutely a political statement.
Oh, totally. Well, yeah, I mean that's that thing, obviously about the other, as you say, that political statement, but also this idea of work is we live to work. This idea of being manipulated or being shown how happy you are to work. I mean, there's one bit where, as you say, you've got the marionettes, those sort of like cheerleader types with the batons and things, but you've also got like a sort of like a choir of happy chappy people that are just sort of like yay to work. And the guy's actually running like a singing audition or something at one point for these people, and he says it's our job to keep up morale. So it's this idea of maintaining this happiness to keep working. And they're there I don't know what they do. Like, you know, but at one point he captures Jamie and he makes him do a dance. And so he's like, well, I'll do the Highland Fling, which is all great. And I actually found it's a funny little scene. Because he says, why do you call it the fling? He says, because I fling myself out the door. And I thought it's silly, but it made me chuckle. But it's this idea again of the British work. To me, I was watching it again, like, okay, well, is this something about the British worker? This idea of, like, you know, living to work. Like, we are going to have it so that you love your work. I mean, you know, we're not into the sort of the 70s striking yet. You know, the miners' strike and rubbish piling up in the streets. That comes 10 years later. But there's still this notion of sort of like, you know, your place is to work. You know, sort of you reach an age and you go into work and you become whatever, and you're happy, and that is your lot. And you know, you should almost be pleased to have that, and be pleased to be working.
Do we not feed you?
Yeah, exactly. Almost like, yeah, that thing of, like, you mentioned, like, before we started, we talking about that idea of Downton Abbey. This idea of sort of like, you know, well, you're in servitude, but do you not get fed? Do you not have a job, and do we not pay you? But this idea of just this servitude, or this position of being the worker and being happy and being told that you should be happy to be such. I mean, that's been around for years. I mean, it's one of those things we're sort of experiencing now, isn't it? Of people going like, well, I'm not bloody happy to do it, and screw you and your job. But I wondered if, like, I couldn't really find, I didn't look deep enough, but it did feel to me like this impression for the 60s, where it was that sort of like, especially younger people, probably a bit more free love and a bit more sort of like wanting to experience a different thing to the 50s generation. And it was like, you know, no, we're all happy to work. But then it does say, well, you're being manipulated to do such. So I don't know. That felt like something to me.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And I mean, just to tease that out, and I haven't thought about this, but I mean, I think that there is this way in which that is sort of questioned. You know, the sort of, are you happy working? And also the sort of very British, don't question your betters kind
Yes.
of, hierarchy. And all of that is definitely portrayed negatively. But the solution to that is, right, kill the Aborigines, metaphorically. But then also one of my pet peeves, which is this sort of ill-defined freedom. So, you know, I think you're quite right that those things are interrogated, but what, you know, or questioned. But again, I mean, this is not really, you know, going too deep. It's a pulp story, as you say. But one of my pet peeves is this sort of like, the solution is freedom, and we're free now, right? Well, what does that mean? I mean, does that mean nobody gets food allotments anymore? I mean, and we do this thing over here in the States, especially. I mean, you know, we're talking about, we're recording this as, you know, the truckers in Canada are protesting, you know, and people are attacking school boards and literally just breaking windows of schools, you know, in anger over being forced to wear masks because my freedom. And it's like, there is this amorphous idea of, well, you're free now. Right. Well, what does that mean?
Yeah.
Does that mean that I have the free time to go to the colony library and read Sartre and philosophical tracts? I mean, does that mean that I have? And what is the education like here? Is the food allotment going to continue? I don't know any of this, but damn it, now I'm free.
This idea of freedom has become such an incredible sort of, what's the word? Not so much a talking point. It's red meat. They call it red meat to the back benches. They call it over here. So this idea of, like, you know, freedom. We have a secondary element to this as well in Britain. This idea of sovereignty. And if you want to go down this path, and, you know, we say, you know, let's not try and do it. You know, I'm trying not to do this, but I'm going to do it anyway. you could take this idea if we are manipulated and we've been told to enjoy and to live by certain rules and to do certain work, and now we have our sovereignty back. I'm taking Terror of the Macra as a Brexit story.
Yeah, I was going to say the Macra is Brussels.
yeah, the Macra is the EU, and the Doctor is Boris Johnson, and he saved us and gave us our sovereignty back.
Well, the only difference is Brussels doesn't want gas. What they want is your fish, damn it.
Exactly. Yeah. However, if let's be honest. So this colony, this small, let's call them an island nation, was saved from this other that has been corrupting them into doing the work for them by a scruffy man with dishevelled hair and an ill-fitting suit. Yeah. Now I'm saying this is prophetic. This story.
Oh yeah.
I'm making very tenuous links, but you were right. This idea of sovereignty or freedom.
Don't be ridiculous, because this scruffy man with an ill-fitting suit employs a Scot.
Yeah. That's the one problem. That's the one problem where the Scottish guy is the one that stands. The one that stands. Yeah, the Scottish person stands by him. I don't know. This idea of freedom, you're right. This idea of sort of sovereignty and freedom to be oneself is. I'm not going to. I'm not saying we should all be controlled. I agree, but it's so malleable and so. I'm going to be controversial, and maybe you'll.
Heavens, no.
It's also incredibly selfish.
Yeah.
This idea of freedom, of sovereignty, you get the sovereign individual, don't you? Of like, I have the right to be me.
The sovereign citizen movement.
Exactly. Yeah. That your rules don't apply to me, and we get we get over here as well. Like, you can't arrest me because I do not acknowledge your authority. That's great. I have got a truncheon. Maybe that'll acknowledge your face. But like,
yeah. I know that I know the skin color of anyone who has ever said these statements.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, there's a minority going like, he'll learn his lesson. Just watch. This isn't going to go well.
Well, you say that, but we managed to take our white shooters into custody over here.
That's very true. Unless they show some sign of mental illness, in which case they get shot down by 20 guys on the highway. But different story. But this idea of sovereignty and freedom is it's bizarre, because even in this, at the end of this, when the Macra are destroyed, and they're like, we're free, and you're like, to do what?
Right. What is it that you want?
Yeah.
I mean, and this is, look, I mean, my country fought a revolution for freedom from your country. That was about a lot of things, not least of which taxation and, disconnection from the bureaucracy. But, it seems to me that, and we see this in movies, right, where, you've thrown off the alien invasion, and then you get, the wreckage of Washington, D.C., and you get your, people lifting up their hands and, we're free, we've thrown off the invasion. Right. Your country is a shambles. There are no food, we've seen with COVID, like what happens when, shipments start breaking down. Right. What are you going to eat tomorrow? What's your plan for any of this? And it seems to me that whether it's freedom or sovereignty, I mean, sovereignty is, a pet peeve of mine. Because nobody is sovereign. I mean, we have treaty interests. I mean, I'm proud of my country for pioneering, even if we commit them ourselves, crimes against humanity. The second you're proud of that, you've acknowledged we are not sovereign. We are subject to international law and better for it. So sovereignty seems to me especially stupid, but this sort of amorphous freedom, like, right, you have this freedom, but if you can't get a job because you look different, or or you're poor, I mean, over here people will talk about freedom, and I'll think, right, you don't have health care. You barely have a roof over your head. You're working for a minimum wage at a job where you're treated like shit, but you have this myth that that's okay because you've made that quote unquote choice, right?
Well,
you're not a slave, so you've made this choice, so that means you're free. Well,
yeah, I mean, I'd say this. You get this idea that you hear it chanted. This is not even an Americanism. I think this is like I hear this elsewhere. It's I would rather I'd rather die free than live oppressed.
Braveheart.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You know, and even with Braveheart. Yeah, I love the fact that at the end of the film, it actually acknowledges well they stayed subservient to the British for 700 years, but at least he tried. But that's the thing, is that this idea of sort of like you get these sort of sound bites, like say, I'd rather die free than live oppressed, or sort of like no, yeah. But then the counter of that is no man is an island. And so I find this hilarity at the moment, this idea of this sovereignty or sort of like individual freedoms. But then they'll be like, but everyone needs to reach out and talk, and we need to share our feelings. And I'm like, all right, well, I'm happy to do that. In fact, I want to do that because I think it's good therapy. I think it's good relations. However, everybody else is clearly telling me that they're a sovereign individual. But this comes back to this idea of the social contract.
Mm-hmm.
Like we all live. You and I, I'm sat in a house. This house is attached to another house. I live in a semi-detached house. I have an entryway on one side and a house attached to on the other side. Now, if I was to play heavy metal music at 2:00 in the morning at a very loud volume, I'm free to do such a thing, as long as it's below a certain amount of decibels, it's not bothering the entire neighborhood. The police aren't going to get involved. But I can tell you right now, my neighbors are going to be a bit annoyed. So there's an element where you just go, well, all right, well, in order to keep the peace and to actually not to be a prick, I will turn my music off at a certain point, or I will turn it down, or I will do things, because you have that social contract. But this is
and possibly the law,
Well, law aside, it's just this idea of how you have to survive and how we agree to live in a society. And so there's this idea of I hated that whole thing of in the Joker movie, we live in a society. It's like I don't even get what it all means, but this idea of you do, you're not an individual. We are all cogs in the machine, and yes, I fully accept that we are being taken advantage of by certain elements of that society, and so we need to adjust how it all works. But the fact of the matter is, in this country, for example, we have food banks going up the wazoo. Food banks are more sort of in demand than ever before.
Same here.
How is it that within a country where we have freedom,
right,
and we are looking at this social contract, we should be looking at this and going this idea of freedom should mean that everybody is free to do these things. And so it's not. Yeah. So I hate
you have the NHS. I mean,
for now.
For now, right? Well, I mean, the thing is, I think of one of the reasons why, to be honest, and I know we're pushing the politics, but one of the reasons why I am so suspicious of it, I hate the superficial talk of freedom, is, the jingoism over here of sort of well, I'm proud to be an American because at least I know I'm free. And it's right. If your kid has cancer and you don't, you're fucked. I mean, because you can't go to a hospital and get chemo. You'd better find some charity that's going to subsidize you. And in order to do that, you better hope that they don't look at you and say, yeah, you look kind of Muslim, not sure we want to take you. I mean, you're subject to, the vagaries of so what is the point of that freedom? And I am proud to be an American. I mean, we were talking about patriotism before, and I want England, I want France to be to have a healthy patriotism. I think I have a healthy patriotism, but there is no problem to which, well, at least I know I'm free is an acceptable damn answer, right?
This is it. Yeah, we are free to. It's the same over here, and I think COVID has really brought this to the fore, isn't it? I'm free to do whatever I want. I'm not going to wear a mask. I'm not going to have a vaccine. You go, all right, fine. In that case, well, I'm free to tell you to do one. I'm free to say,
Yeah.
you are not allowed in my shop. You are not allowed in my restaurant. You're not allowed in my house.
Sure.
And you go, well, that's oppression. No, that's freedom.
Right.
That's my freedom today to go away. Like I am, that's how it goes both ways.
Mhm.
If there's a border and you're saying, well, we're going to put up a wall on that border, well, that goes two ways. Well, we don't want your stuff coming in, and the other side's going to go, well, we don't want your stuff coming in either. So it's this the idea of a contract has really got to start coming back.
I agree.
I saw this idea on there was a thing on, it was talking about freedom actually. It was on TikTok today, and you talk about this was an American thing about healthcare. And it broke my heart, and I couldn't, to the extent I couldn't watch it. I had to sort of flick on, and I ended up coming back to it to watch it because it bothered me. There was a woman in tears. Her, I think 7 or 8 year old son has got type 1 diabetes or type 2, whichever one needs insulin. I can't remember. But anyway, he's been diagnosed from a young age, and he needs it at least like twice a day, I think, to maintain. And the cost of the prescription has been going up again and again and again, to the extent that the prescription is now $1,000
a month.
I don't know. She went in to get this prescription, and it was like $1,000 for whatever that prescription was to fulfill. She didn't say what, and she was in tears because she's like, I couldn't afford it.
Mhm.
I just cannot afford it. I don't know what. And she was in the car, having come at the chemist, and she's like, I don't know what I'm going to do. I have to tell my son that he cannot have his next dose of insulin, or we're going to have to cut back and ration the insulin. And then
that's happening. That's been happening for a long time over here. Insulin rationing, right?
And then this doctor duetted with it. And he was an English doctor, or a British doctor, I should say. Apologies. And he said, this is baffling to me. He said, not just because of the American healthcare system. He said the guy that discovered insulin, when he realised what it could do, he waived his patent so that it could be free for everyone, and it should be distributed as such. He said, so there is no patent charge on this. There is no one that holds a patent for it. It's just a matter of making it. He said, this pharmaceutical company there is no charge for any of this. There's the chemicals and stuff that goes into making it. But he said this is what it says. Like, this was originally set up as an act to free these people so that they could live a life, and now it's being used as an element of control. And it was just heartbreaking to think, like, that's this. But it comes back to freedom. This is what capitalism is,
right?
That company
she's free to make a choice to buy that insulin or not, right?
And they are free to charge whatever they want,
right?
But that's free, and that's where freedom comes to this selfishness. It's not. It should, we need to have this idea of a society that works as a contract. You're right. We've gone off on a whole political rant tangent. We'll pull it back to Doctor Who in a sec, but.
Yeah, it does reflect the superficiality of the liberation narrative, that this episode has, sort of, just throw off the oppressor and everything's fine. But I certainly understand exactly what you're talking about, and it is infuriating to me too. And again, this notion of freedom does not add anything to this conversation. It literally just is a non sequitur, and there are times where it's not. I'm a reconstructed capitalist. I'm fine with a free market in theory, but all of these theories don't matter if you can't eat or you can't give your kid insulin, for God's sake. And I had a conversation with a friend of mine who was a philosophy major and was talking about how. And now we're really afield, but was talking about how, all philosophical schools are essentially top down, right? That there has not, that there needs to be philosophy that goes from the bottom up, from our material circumstances, and constructs an idea of good and evil based on that. And I thought, yes, that's exactly what I believe. And to me, all of these ideologies of capitalism or freedom or control, all of these themes and ideologies do not matter if the reality on the ground is what you're discussing. And whatever that system is, it's broken, and this should not be this way, and we can do better as a society, as humanity, ultimately, because, I mean, if an alien came from outer space and said, "What the hell are you doing? This objectively makes no sense,"
Well, it doesn't. I mean, the thing is, what you said there is, and it's a fine point actually. All philosophy, and again these ideologies and this idea of sort of like economic structures and models does not get discussed or considered or whatever until you reach a certain level of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And that's the fundamental. I always go back to Maslow because that hierarchy of needs, and you could probably change it a little bit to modernize it, but it's still fundamental because those first couple of layers, that idea of safety and base needs and other things, everyone always talks about those top two. The eventual thing of getting to self-actualization, and that's where you get all the philosophizing and all this other stuff. But you can't do that without going through the others. And part of that is obviously like self-awareness and all this other stuff. Like you have to do some work. But another part of it is having the time and the money to be able to do that. Yeah. If you don't have the time and the money, then you are trapped at that bottom of that hierarchy, and everyone that's in those upper layers will completely control how you get in or out of those lower hierarchies.
Right, and there are people who will say that the system is designed to do that, right?
Yeah.
So because we need our servant cast, and so best not to give them too much time or to intellectual entertainment or anything. Best to keep them work to be happy.
Exactly. I almost think, and this is maybe we'll get to this at the end, because I'm sure there'll be others. If you were to watch them all back to back, and I'm sure there'll be other Doctor Who fans that could probably tell us this, that have similar outcomes where you go, actually, this one doesn't work. Like the Doctor escapes or gets away, but actually he's left like wreckage in his wake.
Yeah.
A little bit like, I almost want, I'd like them to have like whether it be a short series or like a mini series or a season or whatever they do, where the Doctor is actually confronted with when you were younger, like you made some really stupid mistakes. Guess what? You've got a time machine. Like you need to go back and fix some of this stuff. Like, and he goes back to this colony, and it's like 6 months after the Macra terror, and it's an absolute shambles. There's there's a mass breakdown of discourse.
People are keeping slaves, like sort of Fury Road style.
Yeah, there's like there's a guy running around like wearing a hockey mask and just a hockey mask and a cup, and that's it. Like I would love that to be the case, where like somehow something intercedes and says like, you may have become a better man, and obviously the Time War has fed that. But you have left some stuff in your wake that before anything happens, before you end up on Trenzalore, you've got to go back and sort some of this stuff out. I'd love to see that and actually go back and go, we can actually apply a more modern morality to this, and he's actually going to clean up some of this mess he left behind.
Well, I mean, I mentioned Wrath of Khan, but I mean, you could totally do a Macra terror sequel that, where people have been plotting revenge against the Doctor. Yeah. It's interesting because you mentioned the hierarchy of needs. Well, let's run that analysis on this episode. It's the Macra that are on the lowest level.
Yes.
They want to breathe. Everybody else is in these posh environments. They have food is not a concern. There's enough surplus of labor to have a marionette squad. I mean, things are pretty good for that population. The Macra are like, I'd like to breathe, sir. Yeah. But they're put in charge, so and they're crab people, so we think of them as the bad guys.
Yeah, you're right. You are totally right. Like they are the ones that are trapped. The atmosphere is what traps them. They are literally trapped by their circumstances, and so have had to adapt to survive. This isn't an invasion. This isn't like, I would think of like, think back to Quatermass 2. This isn't some sort of bio thing being sprung up on Earth to manipulate a workforce. No, this is like, you sort of knackered our planet and we want it back.
Yeah, well, I mean, again, we don't really know that they're indigenous, but it's sort of implied. I mean, there's no
Mm.
indication that they brought anything
Well,
with
no,
them.
well, yeah, um, it's again, it's not stated. However, when the Doctor is looking at the inflow and outflow pipes I think it's an episode towards the end of episode 3, and they're looking at how this works in these pipes, and Jamie is the one that's in the mines.
Mm-hmm.
The Doctor says it's clear they have had something down there for many, many years.
Mm-hmm.
So he's aware that, like, well, this has been around. These tunnels have been around for like he might even say eons. I don't know. But he says they've definitely like many, many years. So it suggests to me that they were there first.
Yeah, yeah. No, I mean, I think that's the most logical thing.
Yeah. So the Macra, it's it's where you go like, yeah, this is fun, but the more I'm picking out, the more sort of like it doesn't.
Well, I mean, two things about that. One, I was thinking like, well, the Macra were like, yes, we have hypnotized you. On the other hand, can you blame us?
Yeah.
Like, we need to breathe, and you have clearly shown you are not to be trusted. And the only way we could make you give us the gas we need to breathe and live is by tricking you through hypnosis. Because you just look at us, and all you see is a crab that needs extermination. And you pretty much proved it the first chance you got.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, this is if it's not even like they're eating them.
No.
If they were like harvesting the humans, which I'm sure has been done in Classic Who at some point, but if they were even like harvesting the humans for food or something, like in the mines, people constantly go missing. Oh, well, they're actually eating them. Okay, now they're becoming a bit more of a threat. Like, no, we've
They
decided
seem more
that
evil.
there's an actual physical threat, but there's not even that. Like, people die in the mine because of exposure to the gas and because of the amount of work they have to do. But that could all be resolved with a decent health and safety regime.
Right. Yeah. The Macra are like, right, we're going to implement OSHA regulations and just fix this right up.
Yeah.
But I also want to say that, we've gone off on politics, but I do think it's, I like this episode. And I'll still defend this as a fun pulpy episode. I think it's, above average for Classic Who. And I think, and I do want to say that it is okay to like stuff and still say this is kind of an anti-indigenous people's, massively racist plot that has a lot of problems. You can say that and still like it. It's safe to say, yeah, this is some pulpy fun. On the other hand, we acknowledge these problems. And I think too often, both sides of the equation, frankly, equate those two and say, well, you've got to throw it away if it's got problems, or liberals are saying this has problems, so I just want to enjoy my classic Doctor Who. We enjoy our classic Doctor Who. That doesn't mean we have to shut our brains off.
No, and that's sort of, I think, if anything, if you are saying I just want to enjoy my classic Who, and you say that's fine, I'm happy for you to do so. But a big part of enjoying a show like this is the fact of taking it and saying, yeah, in fact, saying it has its problems. It doesn't take away from the fact that actually this show is, like you say, it's good fun. Troughton actually works I actually really quite like him as the Doctor. And even like some of
look cool.
The Macra the Macra designs are good. I like this idea of the bureaucracy and the sort of the disharmony between the pilot and Ola. All that works for me. Like, as a story, it works. It's just the finale when you're like, yeah, this sort of opens up all kinds of unfortunate questions. But again, I also accept this was a serial, as we've said, made by the BBC for a Sunday evening or whatever, for the family to come to get together, and was supposed to have a bit of a cliffhanger and was never really meant to be seen again.
Right. Hence the junking program. Right. I mean, we should say for listeners that the BBC, I think it was in the 70s, went through and started junking old tape, and they called it the junking program. They were just like, right, our archives are too big, just go in there and find old tapes and get rid of them. And a lot of Classic Who was saved because it was exported to other countries. So again, Britain owes its patrimony only exists because of other countries.
Yeah, Australia, I think, is a big part of that. They had a lot and they gave it back. So
yeah. So so we are watching this, sort of reconstructed. I mean, the BBC didn't think this was worth preserving. Yet here we are watching it, and now the BBC is paying people to make an animated version of this, of this thing that was designed to be disposable.
And that disposability, though, that idea of it being disposable is clearly important. Like, you were never supposed to think like this level of discourse and analysis that we are applying to it was never intended. Like, when they wrote this, they were like, what are the cliffhangers in it? Right, you've got this, and this. Brilliant. What's the resolution? They get blown up. Excellent. That'll be exciting. Move on.
Well, the fact that it wasn't intended doesn't mean that. Like any text, it shouldn't be. Those things aren't present. And I don't know. I mean, I'm sure that even on BBC, on the BBC in the 60s, there were some of these discussions. It's not as if people weren't aware of implications of their plots. It's just that you're churning this stuff out at a massive clip, and know that if you screw it up, right, I mean, it's going to be re-aired once and maybe exported to the colonies, and that's about it.
Yeah, and that was always the intent, wasn't it? It was like, because I mean, the thing again, we've got to remember, I said this was being shown on television in the 60s. It was being produced as a serial to counter cinema and the growth of, sort of like try and keep that balance. But the other thing as well, as you say, there was no thought of home entertainment. To the extent that much like my love of novelizations is well known, and again these went through a similar process. If you couldn't get a film, there was no way you were going to get a film, so they novelized it and you read the novelization, or then you might catch it later on television at some point in the future. But the same with Doctor Who, like in the 80s, or I think in the 70s, they novelized all these stories.
Every single Doctor Who episode of the classic series got a novelization.
yeah, because that was how you enjoyed it post watching it. That was how you rewatched it. Yeah. And there might be repeats. The BBC probably would repeat some stuff later. But there was no intent of it at this point. So it's interesting how much they did get away with in that respect. So I do find that interesting.
I did want to say that, before we wrap up, I mean, I did want to talk about how other issues that are sort of annoyances with this episode, as well as good stuff. I mean, and I do enjoy this, but it does seem to me that for a fascistic society, they really let people run around unsupervised an awful lot. And they talk tough, like, well, you're in trouble. Well, you'll go to jail for that. But no, but it's just like, right, you'll go to jail. How are we going to put you in jail? We'll summon the guard. Oh, you left before the guard got there? Well, I guess there's nothing we can do but let you run around some more.
Yeah. I completely understand Ola's frustration in this series. Because his job is to be he is like chief of police. Like, his job is to, and he keeps saying, look, they've committed a crime against our rules. At least let's lock them up. And the pilot's like, well, they didn't know. I'll leave it for now. And then the doctor literally walks into a cell and lets someone go. And they run off. And then the owner's like, look, can we just lock these strangers up? They clearly can't be trusted. And the pilot's like, well, they're here now and they've sort of given themselves up. And so, let's let them off. Repeatedly.
Yes.
I can imagine that Ola's just like smacking his head against a wall, going, like, I can't do my job because it keeps getting. He's angry for a reason.
Right, like I know you think I'm the bad guy here, but
Yeah.
we need some control over this.
Yeah,
I thought one of the most
you literally gave me a job. Let me do it.
Yes, and I thought one of the most ridiculous moments of this is where everybody's told to stay in their rooms, right? You don't go out at night. And ostensibly this is so you don't see the Macra wandering around the city at night. So Medoc has escaped and he's run away. And the doctor just leaves. No, there's no cameras on the door, there's no detection.
A locking mechanism.
Yes. But the doctor just goes out, he hangs out with Medoc, helps him escape for a while, and then they get captured. And so he has both broken curfew and then gone out and helped a criminal continue to evade the authorities. And Medoc says, oh no, he was convincing me to turn myself in. And they say, oh, right, well, good on you. No problem then. We won't throw you in prison. Wait a minute. He went out and broke curfew.
Yeah.
And what is it his job? He's just arrived here. It's not his job to go tracking down escaped convicts and convince them to turn themselves in. This is so absurd.
Well, there's a moment at the end when like Ola's temper gets the better of him, like he really boils over, and he actually says to the pilot, "He's like, your authority is ridiculous. Like, you're running this place into the ground." And there's a part of me going like, "Yeah, no, you're right." Like,
absolutely, yeah. I mean,
I'm completely again. Ola is supposed to be sort of like the baddie, but the amount of times I'm like, "No, you're right."
Yeah, and he uses the word ridiculous, and I think it's one of those moments where a script sort of acknowledges the problem, or puts a spotlight on the narrative problem. And there's no, this is ridiculous. They've run around forever. There's no right. I think everybody's got to agree with that. Yeah.
And I do like, but the thing is, it makes me chuckle. Like, I like that because I took it again. I did notice that. And I kind of like Ola and his building frustration. And again, I was like, this feels like it's intentional humor. Like they are playing there's an absurdity to this that is clearly like they're playing with the humor of it. And I definitely enjoy that. That relationship is quite entertaining.
Yeah, and I'm maybe a little more bothered by them running around, but I agree with you that as Ola points this out and says, "This is out of control. This is ridiculous." Yeah, it is fun, and you don't mind it. I mean, it is sort of like, we know we're a pulpy serial, and we're not going to apologize for it. We're not going to pretend that this is.
But that point when he says about it being ridiculous. That is the point when the doctor comes in and sort of makes them up and sort of treats them like school children and says sort of like, oh, what's all this? I understand you're upset with each other, but Ola apologized to the pilot apologized to Ola, and then sort of interrupts. And you can still Ola's like ripping his hair out, like, what? This stranger's now telling me what to do. Like, this is madness. Like, it kind of works well in that sort of it feels, again, like oddly, having gone back and listened to our sort of, talk recently about Terry Gilliam and sort of like Brazil and that idea of sort of like the ludicrousy of bureaucracy, like and hierarchy, and the people that do sort of go, well, you are my boss, so I will do exactly what you say, and we do need a B62-3 form, that sort of thing. Like it does slightly poke fun at that as well, where like. Ola's like, well, all right, well, you are the pilot, so I've got to do as you say. But then they do counter that, because although there's that frustration, Ola is in support of control.
Yes.
Because control is also saying, lock them up.
Yeah. There is that point at the end where control says, don't listen to the leader anymore.
Yeah. So it does have those little moments that are quite good fun, and like I say, almost like say poking fun in itself. Yeah,
I mean, I do think that it sort of undermines the totalitarian sort of Brave New World stuff to have them running around so
Yeah.
easily. And yeah, I'm fascinated by that sort of presentation. I want to see more of it. But I think this is sort of intrinsically a problem with those kinds of narratives, right? You've got to have your heroes running around and doing things, and yet they're in a totalitarian state. And occasionally, you can get away with this, like sort of Handmaid's Tale kind of, suggesting like, yeah, a lot of fascist regimes, while they have control, really are also pretty incompetent.
Yes.
The Nazis certainly were. One of the things that's very underappreciated about the Nazi regime was how stupid it was.
Yeah.
For all of its efficiency in some areas, dreadfully so. They were really dumb.
Well, just to add a point, you say, we took that scene where they've run out, and the Doctor finds out about the subliminal messaging and stuff, and he comes back and he breaks the speakers in the room, which is all well and good. It's fine, so add sort of vandalism to his list of crimes, but
they're fine with.
Yeah. But one of the things I wanted to ask about, because obviously this is an animated version, and obviously it has hindsight and also knowledge of what comes up. I don't know what was in the original show. I don't know what he used to destroy those. But when he shows the tool, because he said, well, what have you used to do that? He is literally holding a screwdriver.
I thought about that too. And it's not a sonic screwdriver. It's just a regular screwdriver. Yeah. But they do sort of zoom in on it, like maybe he had an idea.
Yeah, and that was, I was like, that's interesting. Like, was that a bit of a joke? That in the show he may have used a hammer, or could have just been a lump of wood or something. But they were like, no, we're going to use a screwdriver. I thought that was a nice little joke.
Even if he used a screwdriver originally, they sort of zoom in on it as a bit of a joke. I was kind of mild. I mean, I'm fine with it. It's animation, from reconstructing a show from the 60s. But I was sort of mildly irritated at how easily disabled these speaker systems are in the wall. And there's also gas flowing in that sort of makes them more susceptible. That's sort of never mentioned again. That's not part of this disabling process. But, I'll go along with it.
Yeah, it all sort of, like you say, there are moments that are sort of like dropped by the wayside, but it's got. This goes back to that animation, the reconstruction. I do want to applaud again how good or how much I enjoyed this reconstruction, because again, like to say it's not Pixar. This isn't sort of like award-winning top-level animation. It's not or photorealistic, but they know what they've got and they use it well. The facial expressions are pretty good. The use of close-ups, the use of color, the use of shadow in particular is really good. And so I was a little concerned about, will this animation put me off? Because poor animation can be a real distraction. But no, I think this is done really well. And as I said before, the fact it fits the audio track is good. But even like I say, they've obviously had to re-edit this for shots, and they do use it to then add in additional backgrounds. Like there's a moment where they do go into those underground tunnels, and I'm sure none of that footage exists. So, but they give like huge backgrounds, and then they raise the platforms way up, and they do all this other stuff. And I'm like, it's this nice balance between, as you said, like when the Macra attacks Jamie in the tunnels, it opens with that thing of like the claw creeping in. You can imagine there being a fine piece of string sort of hanging it up as they dragged it in. And they keep those in.
You see somebody's hand just at the edge of the screen holding the prop.
Yeah. So I can imagine that there's that intent to keep that 60s feel. They didn't want to take it away, but they also take the opportunity to give you that little bit of extra depth, or that little bit of extra that you wouldn't, that extra of scenery or budget that wouldn't have existed. And I think it really strikes a really cool balance to achieve that.
I think you're right, and I really like that point. I also find myself looking at the backgrounds.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in the live action version, and certainly in all live action Who from this era, you look at those backgrounds and you think, right, that looks like a cheap set.
Yeah.
That's some painted cardboard, and when they go through the door, you will see the set rocking, right? I mean, seeing stones in the Aztecs, you're very conscious of the fact that these are painted stones.
Yeah.
And, there's no recessed work between them. Almost because it's animated, I'm sure that it keeps pretty close to what those sets looked like, but because it's animated, it's not rocking back and forth, and it looks better than a cardboard set. And so I find myself sort of appreciating all of that work that went into these sets without that deficiency, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I agree. Like it gives it a polish without taking away some of the charm that you would have had of sort of like that aesthetic, that 60s sci-fi aesthetic. So it works to sort of again, it's that balance. Whoever did this, I would like to shout out. I don't know who the animation studio is. I probably should know that, but a shout out to them. Like whether it was the BBC or whoever, but they did a great job. And even like keeping some of the actors, obviously like Troughton looks like the Doctor looks like Patrick Troughton, and the others look like the actors. I think Ola and the pilot look a little different from the actors, and probably some others. The other thing I would say as well is you say about the backgrounds is the population of the colony.
Yes. Oh yes.
Like they do take they clearly take the opportunity to add more people in than would have been in the scenes in the original live action.
Well, you can imagine if this were made today, they would mention how long has this colony been there, right?
Yeah.
What is the population of this colony? And I found myself sort of wondering that too. I mean, we don't see many workers. We see a lot more. Matter. That's quite true. Yeah, apparently Sun and Moon Animation Studio in Bristol, and they used Toon Boom Harmony as master controller, ironically enough, to do this. Yeah, but I'm quite taken with it too, and I do a couple things that do sort of annoy me or are worth pointing out is that population, right? What does the rest of this city look like?
Yeah.
Another thing is one of the weaker moments is this whole thing about the valves and the gas flow through the. The doctor says, like read me the dials, Polly, and she's like, right. The first one's 0, the other one's 100%. It's like, yeah, you don't need to be a scientist to figure this out. Well, whatever shall I do? And then he said, oh, I've run the calculations and you should reverse them, and then read me the dials now, Polly. Well, it's 100% and 0. I mean, it's quite sort of awkwardly done. And
it is. It's quite cool because at one point he says we have to change the flow, or the polarities. I just don't know which is which.
Yeah.
And you go, well, if you're going to change them, it doesn't really matter because this one becomes the other, and sort of vice versa. So,
rotate those dials the other way.
Yeah. There's only two. That's it. Well, there's only 2. Even in the animation, so it shouldn't be too hard. One's in, one's out.
Yeah. I mean, and then there's this whole he draws this schematic of how this works mathematically, which is in a way like a cool moment of like, oh, the doctor's smart and he's an alien. But what exactly and it's funny, he gives himself a 10 out of 10 and then changes it to an 11. There's your sort of Charlton humor, but and that's fun stuff. But what the hell is all of that for? It's for like, there are 2 valves,
Yeah. It doesn't equate to a great deal at the end of the day.
No.
But you say it does push the Doctor to the forefront. Like he is the driving force. He is the one that comes up with the solution. He is the one that's sort of doing the calculations. And so I do appreciate that they have given him much more to do. And he feels like he is actually, like you say, he's an active participant. Like he's out and about doing stuff. and making a nuisance of himself. And I do kind of like that that feels like Doctor Who. So yeah, I think we've run dry of for the Macra. Any final thoughts?
No, I mean we sort of taken the piss out of this, but I think we both agreed that this is good fun, and I think it while dated, it certainly holds up remarkably well, especially for low budget material from the '60s. It's actually quite fun to watch. I enjoy it.
Yeah, I agree. I think this is one of those, like I say, it's if you take this as a pulpy adventure, it works incredibly well. It's got all the ingredients you need. It's not particularly overly complicated. It's got some good twists in it. And again, the only real problem is if you start to sort of like scratch away at the finale, and you're like, yeah, this starts to sort of fall apart. But as a fun Doctor Who story, it works. Especially as a classic Doctor Who, and again, taken in the time of it that it is. I really enjoyed this. And as you say, I enjoyed this more than Hartnell Aztecs.
Mm-hmm.
Not so much because of the education thing, which did crop up in my head, but because it felt much more like the Doctor's in charge and there was a driving force behind it, and that sort of thing. It felt a little bit just lighter in tone, which is a bit more sort of palatable. But yeah.
I find myself sort of conflicted because I agree with you 100%. I have more affection for Hartnell. I have no affection for Charlton as the Doctor. At the same time, I do quite like some of the animated ones that I've seen, including this, and it does sort of feel a bit more like the formula's coming together.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to see how they treat each of the Doctors, and I think that's what's going to be most interesting, because we're moving on obviously to Pertwee next, and Pertwee again is a very different beast. It's an Earthbound Doctor. They had less money. They tried to keep it Earthbound, so they actually had him working for UNIT, and we'll talk about that. So again, they go in a very different direction with a very different Doctor. So it will be a different tone entirely again. So that'll be incredibly interesting to see how that one comes together.
Well, it's fun going on this journey together and talking about it as two Whovians, who haven't seen all of this stuff. And I hope that listeners like going on this journey too. And I just want to say thanks for listening. Thanks for going on this journey with us. Send us a tweet at PodTimeSpace and let us know what you think.
Yeah, join in the conversation. We're making comments. One thing we should highlight: we are only commenting on a single story per Doctor, so we're getting like a glimpse of each of these Doctors. So if we're miles off, or you think there's actually something to counter anything we say, let us know. Point us to other stories. These are the ones we picked out because they were considered some of the best of each Doctor. But if there's a favourite that you have and we haven't mentioned, let us know. Well, we can happily go off. Guide us. I haven't watched a great deal, especially with the first 3 Doctors. So guide us. Tell us what we should be looking at. But yeah, no, I'm enjoying this. Jumping in the TARDIS and jumping from regeneration to regeneration. It's fascinating.
And if you like black and white 1960s TV, Scott and I are talking every single week about the Twilight Zone over on Patreon. It's cheap, and you could really help us pay the bills and keep the show going.
Yeah, so for £5 a month, that's it. It's just £5. Well, they say it's less than a cup of coffee, or about the same as a cup of coffee, to be fair. But you get the two of us talking Twilight Zone on a weekly basis. We have now done, as of this, we have done the complete first season of the Twilight Zone. So that's over 36 episodes and a wrap up. And we're getting well into sort of season 2 now. So, you're talking almost 40 episodes, for each one between 15 and 25 minutes. That's a lot of talking, and it's some great television. My first time going through it episode by episode as well. So, Julian is the guide, and we're going through this sort of episode by episode. So it's fantastic. But we
Not
do
to
more.
mention your 30-minute thoughts.
Exactly. Yeah. Not only that, you get a monthly podcast of me doing 30-minute thoughts. I've just done recently, cinema versus streaming, what the DC universe has got left to give, and so much other stuff. I did a commentary for an A-Team episode as well. So all kinds of bits and pieces. That's monthly and quarterly. I also have quarterly creator corner where I bring somebody on who's a creator to talk about all kinds of things. I've had some great ones. Like Kieran Gillen come on and talk about Once and Future. I had Laura Summers come on and talk about the real Ghostbusters. So we've had some really cool kind of people come on to talk about this stuff. So yeah, check out the Patreon for like hours and hours of extra awesome bonus content. It's fantastic.
And the cool thing is, if you subscribe for like £6, you get access to all of that. It's not like you only get the new stuff that's coming out. You get this library of crazy stuff.
Yeah, I think £5 gives you 30-minute thoughts on the Twilight Zone. It's actually, I think £7 gives you the Creator Corner, and you then get to vote on the 30-minute poll. And then if you really want to do as well, at the top level, which I think is £10, you get all of that, and you get to vote for an episode on the main feed of 20th Century Geek. So every quarter you get to vote and choose an episode of what I talk about, which is pretty cool. So much stuff on there, and a load of behind the scenes stuff. Like if you go on there talking sort of comics more, but I give updates on the stuff we're doing. I'm currently, when I did the Judge Dredd book, there was all kinds of behind the scenes stuff there. With Moon Knight, there's going to be some awesome stuff coming there. So yeah, there's all kinds of bits and pieces. It's worth checking out. There's a link down below, but it's basically patreon.com/20cg media, MEDIA. Check the link out below. But yeah, please check it out.
Yeah, and even though I'm a co-host, I am a member. I subscribe to your Patreon because I love everything you're doing.
Yeah, it keeps the lights on at 20th Century Towers, and actually pays for the hosting and all kinds of bits and pieces. So it's a great help, and will help us get to do the places. So hey, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for listening. We really appreciate it, and I hope that you're willing to jump in the TARDIS with us for the next episode, and we talk about the next Doctor. And but yeah, for now, thank you very much, and we shall talk again soon.